Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show here on YouTube. New episodes air every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time with individual interviews posted throughout the following week. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain, to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So, without further ado, let's get it on. Hello out there, all you citizens of the world. Welcome to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. I'm your host today. I'm Michael James. I'm up here in Chicago's 49th Ward. And today I've got two friends that are coming on. In a little bit, we're going to have Pat Handlin, a lawyer who has been on talking about Native American rights, etc. And she's going to give us a little bit of a briefing on what's going on with the longest imprisoned political prisoner in the United States, Leonard Peltier. And with Biden pardoning his son and talking about pardoning others, we're bringing this up, and we hope that you will rally and contact people that Pat will tell us about and make a difference in what happens for the rest of Leonard's life. Our next guest after that will be another friend, Bob Lawson. We go way back to our days in Doin Community Union. He went on to work for the Hayden Senate campaign in California. He went on to work with United Auto Workers, with AFSCME, a number of unions, and then he was part of Rising Up Angry. And we're going to talk about organizing, where we're at today and what needs to happen to make a difference. Before we bring on Pat Handlin, let me just say that I asked our producers to come up with a few little bit of tidbits, and I got a couple. One is, it is fascinating to see Chicago City Council members acting as a true deliberative body, a true strong council, weak mayor dynamic, as progressive and traditionalist alders pour through the mayor's tattered budget, seeking ways to lower or eliminate a property tax increase. Not winning the fair tax state issue a few years ago, along with the defeat of Bring Chicago Home, along with the legacy debt from prior mayors, it makes this a very difficult balancing act. So we have to see where that all goes, and we'll keep you up to date. And those of you who listened or watched last week's show, remember I voiced concern about Trump's pledge to send immigrants back to where they came from. And I pointed out that in the 30s, millions of Mexican Americans were sent back across the border. It's in the news, and Tom forwarded this to me. With the convicted felon's incoming Homeland Security pick in Chicago this week, and that would be a guy named Holman. He's the new border czar. With him in Chicago this week, he boasted about making the city ground zero in immigrant deportations, even families separations. Should we be restarting local self-help resistance groups to block the INS, that's the Immigration and Naturalization Service, part of the Justice Department, from raiding homes or workplaces? Will suggesting such on the air expose one to risk of retaliation by the new regime or even arrest for disobeying the law? There could be a reason why Illinois Democrats aren't engaging with the border czar Holman. They know he likes to fight. He is quoted as saying, "I read the paper every morning, and there are a lot of hit pieces on me," he said. "I love it because I get to live in their minds rent-free, and that's kind of cool." So, in response to that, the Illinois delegation, the Democratic Party delegation, is it ready to fight? Quote, Tom Holman, the next time you come to Illinois, it's a district, Illinois 3, I believe. Next time you come, a district made stronger and more powerful by immigrants, you better be ready to meet the resistance. So said Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, posted on X. And then she said, you may think Chicago needs to get out of the way of Trump's plans for mass deportation, but we plan to get all up in your way. Okay, well, we're going to keep on this because of all the things Trump has said he's going to do. This is the one that's most concerning to me. And I think really its importance to the country as a whole. Immigrants have made this country great. They continue to do so. We need them. We could use more, and we'll keep you posted. So with all that said, Hal James, our engineer, will give us a little tune, and we'll be right back then with our first guest, the one and only, the incomparable lawyer, Pat Handlin. Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's time for our first guest on Live from the Heartland show for the week of December 14th, the year 2024. And we've had Pat Handlin on the show numerous times, usually talking about water or Native Americans. And this week I got an email from Pat, which had information from the Water Protectors Legal Collective about Leonard Peltier. And I had just written my Congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky, who sent out an e-newsletter about what are we most interested in. And I didn't see this on there, but I said, I'm most interested in you helping to get Biden to give clemency or pardon or whatever the proper way is and free Leonard Peltier. Leonard has been, he's an 80-year-old guy. He's a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa and Lakota, Dakota descent. He's the longest serving political prisoner in United States history. On December 4th, Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii, who is the chair of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, took the congressional floor to advocate for Biden to grant Leonard Peltier clemency. Senator Schatz has been a staunch advocate for Mr. Peltier since 2022. So with all that said, let's bring on Pat, who is much closer to the nitty-gritty about what's going on. And for the younger people who haven't followed this for years, listen up. It's really an important case. And for older people, you've been thinking about it for a long time. And this will give us an opportunity to at least turn out a little bit of support for Leonard's freedom as he ages. Okay, good morning to you, Pat, and thanks for listening while I rambled on a little bit.
Morning. Nice to see you, Michael. How are
It's
you?
good to see you. So how about giving us a little history on the Leonard Peltier case? I know that there's a book out by Peter Mathiasen. I remember doing a long review in the Heartland Journal on it. That book got taken off the shelves because of a suit, but it has the history. But we're not going to all read the book right now. We're going to listen to you. So take it away.
So Leonard Peltier was one of the early leaders of the American Indian movement, AIM. And he was actually, I didn't know this until I was looking again at information for today. He was a boarding school survivor. I don't know if your listeners know the history of boarding schools in the United States, but it was part of the genocide of indigenous peoples that followed basically the military forced removal of indigenous people from their lands, creation of treaties and reservations. And then after that, they created these schools where Indian children were forcibly taken from their families, literally, and put in these schools. And they were places of great violence and sexual and physical abuse. And the goal of the schools was to remove children, Indian children, from their cultures, from their families, their language, their cultures. And it went on until like the 1960s and 70s. Anyway, he was a product of those boarding schools for 3 years. He was taken from his grandmother, literally, and he made it back home. But he became an advocate for indigenous people, for his people. After that, as he grew up, and he did a lot of terrific things. But what his case is about is that he and some other AIM leaders were on a ranch called the Jumping Bull Ranch in 1975, when the FBI, allegedly looking for another person, came onto the ranch, did like basically a reign of terror, forcing themselves into people's homes, looking for this guy, and not Leonard. And ultimately there ended up being 2 agents ended up dead, shot. Other indigenous people ended up dead at that time also. But Leonard was charged with other people, 2 of whom went to trial before he did and were found not guilty. And then he went to trial, having fled to Canada, and then he was extradited back. And he went to trial, and they really didn't have any direct evidence of his guilt of him. They argued that he shot the 2 FBI agents, but they didn't have any evidence, any direct evidence. They didn't have an eyewitness. They had a shell casing that they linked to a gun he supposedly had at the time. And theoretically, it was the only one on the ranch that could have shot this shell casing that was found near where the agents were shot. But it turned out that shell casing, that there were 2 FBI ballistics reports regarding that single shell casing. One said it matched to the gun that supposedly Peltier had. The other said it did not. And that was kept from the defense. So once it was found through after the trial, after the conviction, the sentence of 2 life sentences, a Freedom of Information Act revealed this, what's called legally exculpatory evidence, the second ballistics report. And so the defense team did what's called a habeas corpus petition, and they sought to overturn the conviction, at least bring it back to court. And the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, because it was in federal court. Leonard Peltier is in federal custody, was convicted in a federal court. The Eighth Circuit is the appellate circuit for the district court where he was convicted. And this was in 1986. They reviewed the evidence. The shell casing, and they ended up not overturning the conviction. And what they said was their conclusion. This is a quote from the decision. There is a possibility, quote unquote, that the jury would have acquitted Leonard Peltier had the records and data improperly withheld from the defense been available to him in order to better exploit and reinforce the inconsistencies, casting strong doubts upon the government's case. Yet, we are bound by the Bagley test, it's a case, requiring that we be convinced from a review of the entire record that had the data and records withheld been made available, the jury probably would have reached a different result. We have not been so convinced. So, is it a possibility? The Eighth Circuit acknowledges that the jury could have reached a different conclusion, but they decided that it wasn't probable. So they left Leonard Peltier in jail to become the longest serving political prisoner in U.S. history on the basis of very questionable prosecution. So in fact, his clemency petition was drafted by a lawyer named Kevin Sharp, who's a former United States District Court judge. He's a lawyer in Nashville. And it's possible to access the clemency petition online. Kevin Sharp has been interviewed by a variety. You can Google Kevin Sharp and Leonard Peltier and find an interview with Kevin Sharp. But in fact, they don't know who killed the agents. The case against Leonard Peltier, I would argue, is flimsy enough that he should have been given a new trial. But he wasn't. He's also been denied parole repeatedly. And the United Nations, various United Nations agencies have asked that he be released, have supported his bid for clemency. Many Indigenous organizations support his bid for clemency. In 2022, there was an 1,100-mile walk to Washington, D.C. By a variety of Indigenous organizations seeking his release on clemency. So the clemency petition is pending. It's before President Biden, who just granted pardon to his own son. And of all the people, there are a number of people who deserve clemency, and Leonard Peltier is definitely one of them. He's 80 years old. He poses absolutely no threat to anyone. He's a revered elder, Indigenous elder, and he was. One could argue that he was a target of COINTELPRO, the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover written policy against primarily leaders of color, the Black Panther Party, the Indigenous, the American Indian Movement, other organizations, radical organizations from the 70s who advocated really for justice for folks. And so the clemency petition is pending. Leonard Peltier is being kept. He's kept 1,000 miles away from his family, his children and grandchildren. And so the public effort is what will result in his release if it happens. So that's why the Water Protector Legal Collective, which I have a history with, has sent an email, and I believe that you're going to post there a link to the email for President Biden and a phone number for folks to advocate for clemency for Leonard Peltier.
Pat, let me just say that you can contact the whitehouse.gov/contact. You could call 202-456-1111. And if you get the email announcing the show, it'll be there in the description. Let me ask you a couple of questions. You talked about Native American kids. Well, maybe I'll just make comments. Who knows? But Native American children being taken from their homes. And I have a good friend up on the Menominee Reservation, and he always told me a few horror stories about when he was fostered out and taken away from his family. And I know that the FBI has been a principal blocker of any improvement in Leonard's situation. You know, it was the FBI got really behind keeping him in prison, denying parole, that kind of thing. I believe Biden did make a comment maybe within the last year about Leonard Peltier, about being open to it. I don't know if you remember that or if it's come up, but
I don't
it
know,
wasn't.
but I hope that's true.
Yeah, we hope.
But if it is true, if he's open to it, then that means even more how important it is that people let him know, you know, that citizens of this nation let Biden know that we support clemency for Leonard Peltier. It's not a pardon, you know, it's a clemency, it's mercy. It's granting mercy to an 80-year-old man who spent more of his life in the penitentiary than he did as a free man, and an elderly, sick man who should be allowed. I mean, what are we spending our money for? Keeping him in the penitentiary? That's the right wing argument, but at the same time, he should be released, and it's up to us, in reality, to advocate.
Yeah, I would encourage people to, if they can find the book, Peter Mathiassen's book on Leonard Peltier is a wonderful book. You can find a lot of information online. I think it is really important that we contact our Congress people. And in this case, probably the majority of our listeners are in Jan Schakowsky or nearby, congressional districts. And I do encourage everybody to really do what they can to bring this to attention again. I don't know what's happening locally around here on the ground, but I know that nationally there are people who are trying to encourage people to turn out and support the clemency. Any parting words, Pat?
Yes. I mean, Senator Schatz is not the only official who has supported clemency for Leonard Peltier. Bernie Sanders has too. And there are others who have supported clemency for Leonard Peltier. And if anyone, and I would encourage people to go to the Water Protector Legal Collective website if they want to learn more, because there are links on that website. Leonard Peltier, if you go to the political prisoner words at the top of the screen when you get to that website, there's more information about Leonard Peltier. There's information on about some of the UN joint statements regarding his clemency. Also, if anybody wants to read an article about the boarding schools, The Atlantic had an article by an Indigenous woman named Mary Annette Pember. That is a really good article. But for Leonard Peltier, I would encourage you to please contact President Biden and support clemency. Gentlemen.
We know that the millions of people listening and watching our show are going to have heard this call. And I got to be careful what I say about calls to action. But if you want to be really good about supporting democracy and fairness, get on it. Pat Handlin, it's always great to see you in person or on the Zoom. And
you too, Michael.
It won't be long till we see you again.
Thank you for doing what you do.
I appreciate that. I get a lot of accolades on the show. I don't know how many people listen or watch, but we're going to play a little bit of a music, I believe, from a band called Exit, Crossing of Indian Tribes. And it's a band that back in the days of Rising Up Angry and Cooperative Energy Supply, we brought them to Chicago to do a benefit for Leonard Peltier.
Wow.
And we also had John Trudell at the Heartland doing benefits for Leonard. So this is an ongoing issue that's close to our hearts and our minds. And hopefully there'll be some resolution before Biden leaves office for the next guy who we are not excited about. Okay, everybody, stay tuned. We'll be right back with our next guest, the one and only Bob Lawson. We're going to talk about organizing. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or however you're getting this show. See you later, Pat. We'll be right back.
Michael. Take care.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Michael James and the Live from the Heartland show. One of those people that's been a big influence in my life, and I've known him for a long time, is Bob Lawson. We first met when we both had left Berkeley and were organizers in Uptown with Doin Community Union. We were trying to build an interracial movement of the poor. And we worked at Doin together, and then we ended up working at Rising Up Angry together. And then Bob went off and ran Tom Hayden's Senate campaign, worked with the United Farm Workers, United Auto Workers, with AFSCME and other unions. He's someone I've always looked to for advice and inspiration. And with all that said, let's bring him on. So good morning to you, Bob.
Good morning.
Let's start off with you giving us a little bit of who you are, where you come from, and how you got involved in politics and in community organizing.
Given our age, that could take a long time.
We got 26 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I got started in, as you mentioned, in politics around the time of Doin. I actually was inspired by the civil rights movement in the South, by the SNCC, and I went to Washington, D.C. With SNCC to lobby for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party there. Met people from Mississippi and SNCC organizers, and they talked about their philosophy of organizing, and I was totally inspired. And I said, what should I do? And they said, well, as a white person, your job is to go organize white people, particularly poor white people who have the same issues as we do. We're organizing Black people. We need to work together. And so I said, sure. And I had no idea what that meant. But I got back on the train and went back to California. And fortunately, the next year, I met someone who had been at Doin and told me about this project in Uptown in Chicago of building an interracial movement of the poor, focusing on poor whites. And so that I went to, at the end of the year, I went to Chicago, got out of the car in downtown, and they said, get on the L. And I said, what's the L? And they said, go to the Wilson Avenue stop and get off at the Wilson Avenue stop. And I did. And I walked into the Doin office, and I was totally hooked on organizing. That I knew nothing about Southern white culture. I knew nothing about Chicago. It was a tremendous learning experience. And it made me realize that we can actually make change, significant change in people's lives, both in terms of improving their housing conditions, what they did, the welfare rights, and also helping people have meaning in their life and feel good working together. And part of the job of an organizer is to work with people that you would never probably run across, but around a shared set of values. Getting together and working together makes you very close and is a wonderful personal experience besides being able to help improve people's lives. So that's sort of how I got hooked on organizing. And then it all went from there.
Well, you always leave out the part I like best, that you were a linebacker on the Cal football team. But you don't always mention that much. But you went on to work with Rising Up Angry when we had started it, and you had gone off to Cincinnati to try to build an organization similar to Doin there. And apparently that wasn't really working out. And we had started Rising Up Angry, and you and Diane Fager contacted us and talked about coming back to Chicago, and you did. And you emerged as one of the principal figures in Rising Up Angry until you left, and you went off to do other kinds of organizing. I think then it was the Tom Hayden for Senate campaign in California, but you worked with different unions. How about sharing with our listeners some of those experiences?
Sure. Well, when I left rising up angry in Chicago, it was primarily because I realized that we knew how to organize people, but we didn't know how to build a sustaining organization for power, and we didn't know how to fund it. And so I wanted to learn something. The other thing at the time which was about 1977, I believe. Is that right? Yeah.
Oh, 75 or 76.
Okay. Someplace around then. Yeah. 75 probably. Yeah. Is that those of us who are coming out of the quote unquote new left had actually convinced the majority of the people in the country that the war in Vietnam was wrong and that there had been some movement on civil rights, et cetera. But at the same time, the tactics that our quote unquote movement were using was alienating everybody. And so I thought the idea of figuring out how to run for electoral office, which Tom Hayden was trying to do, he was running as an anti-war candidate and also an economic Democrat running for economic democracy. And so I wanted to learn about that. And fortunately, I was able to get involved in that campaign, and I was the statewide labor coordinator. I knew nothing about the labor movement, but because I had experience organizing poor and working class white people in Chicago, they felt I'd be a good fit for the job. So I had to learn really, really quickly about the labor movement and some about electoral politics. And in that campaign, the United Farm Workers were one of the organizations that endorsed Tom Hayden for the U.S. Senate, as was a fledgling American Federation of Teachers, which at the time public employees were organizing for the first time. And I met a lot of really interesting people and saw a huge potential in the labor movement because it was self-funded. It was bringing people together from all different backgrounds. And United Farm Workers were blazing a new path. When the National Labor Relations Act was passed, farm workers and domestic workers were excluded, primarily because at the time they were African Americans, and this was a concession to the South. But anyway, in California, the farm workers were working to pass a new state law giving farm workers collective bargaining rights. And so after the Hayden campaign, which he didn't win, but he did go on to build a grassroots organization in California. I was not part of that, but the campaign laid the groundwork for that. But I went to work organizing for the United Farm Workers. And I learned firsthand about organizing workers. And it was a very exciting time because the law had just passed. Workers had newfound rights. And we were able to take many of the organizing techniques that were developed first in the United Auto Workers and then by a guy named Fred Ross in California that really helped develop strong organization at the grassroots level. And we won a lot of campaigns, and I learned a lot about organizing there and saw the real potential of the labor movement and the labor movement for building a interracial movement of the poor, which poor and working class. And so eventually I came back to Chicago, and thanks in large part to Heather Booth and Paul Booth, I ended up at working for AFSCME. I went to work for AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, right after Jane Byrne got elected mayor, because she said she was going to give public employees collective bargaining, which she didn't do. But I stayed with AFSCME for a few years, and when Harold Washington was running for mayor, that he said he was going to give public employees collective bargaining. So I was fortunate to get assigned to work on his campaign. and I was the North and Northwest Side precinct coordinator for the Harold Washington campaign. And after he won the campaign, we organized the city employees, the county employees, thousands and thousands of public employees in Illinois to build an organization and win collective bargaining rights, which was another really exciting time, and was able to, in a deeply racially polarized time, build a multiracial organization around shared values and shared interests. So sort of went on from there after really quickly. After that, for a while, I went out to California. A fellow who I met in the United Farm Workers named Marshall Gans was starting an organization in California called the Organizing Institute, which was to train a new generation of organizers. And so I went out to work with him. And through that experience, for some reason, I got recruited to the Democratic Party in 1988. And I was the field director for the California Democratic Party. And the reason I took the job is because they committed to spending a huge amount of money in hiring thousands of organizers around the state who would try to build a grassroots organization in California for the first time. And unfortunately, the Democratic nominee for president wasn't much of an inspirational guy. It was Dukakis, but we were able to build a very strong precinct leader organization. So that was also another really strong learning experience for me. And we could still apply the organizing tactics, because what we were doing was we were trying to build precinct leaders in communities, particularly poor communities and places where there was no infrastructure for Democrats. And so we did that. And that campaign quickly taught me that I didn't want to live in the life of the Democratic Party.
Particularly now.
Well, then too. But anyway, so I went back to the labor movement and eventually went to another organization called the Organizing Institute, which was a totally different one. It was created outside the AFL-CIO, but it was funded by the AFL-CIO. And at the time, the AFL-CIO didn't really do organizing. That's why they had to fund the Organizing Institute on the outside. And we were, again, training a new generation of union organizers. And when John Sweeney was elected president of the AFL-CIO, around a platform of including organizing, they brought the Organizing Institute inside the AFL-CIO. And that's how I got in there. And we actually we trained a lot of young organizers and all of that. The whole idea of the labor movement being a strong organizing force didn't quite catch on at the time, which it should have. But anyway, and so then I went on to work with SEIU and AFSCME later and so on.
You've really done a lot, Bob. I'm learning new things about you, and I've known you a long time. I want to talk a little bit about Marshall Gans and an article you sent, and where he raises some questions about people really participating in democracy from the bottom up. And he does talk about unions as one of the places where that's the truest. But first, let me just ask you briefly, because I'm always working on this myself, what is organizing? How would you give a short definition of organizing?
I think organizing is bringing people together around a shared goal and figuring out the structure that it takes and continuing to expand and grow. I think the key part of, I think there's two key parts of organizing. One is outreach, You're constantly reaching out to more people to try to bring them in and expand the base. And second of all is leadership development. You're looking for people who both have natural leadership qualities, meaning that people respect them, and you're also looking for people who can develop those skills and qualities. Because the more leaders there are, that means the more you're going to be able to do outreach and the more you're going to be able to accomplish. And particularly in organizations that don't have the billions of dollars that the right wing does, that we need to tap into as much leadership skills as people have. But I think, when I think of organizing, it's really doing outreach to bring people together around a shared set of goals and hopefully to build an organization that will last over time and continue to expand.
Well, I like that. And I think one of my fortes is always doing the outreach part. And then you did a lot of outreach too, but also really developing that leadership. And I'm thinking about some people inside of Doin and Rising Up Angry who kind of just came out of nowhere and then really emerged, like the two Dovies in the Doin Welfare Union. And I'm sure we could come up with other examples. But one of the things that led me to want to have you back on the show again, besides always like seeing you, is to get your take on where you think the country is at now. We just lost an election. And when I say lost, it's not like we're big fans of the Democratic Party. It's not like we rooted for the Democrats all the time or for the government. But over the years, we saw that as an ongoing place to try to work for a better deal for more people. Seems like we're a little bit in disarray now. We lost an election to almost an avowed fascist. What's your take on our current situation? And then we'll get to what you think maybe we ought to be doing.
Well, my take is along that we don't have time to go into the whole thing, but
you're invited back.
The other side has, had a plan, at least since the 1970s, about how to change the whole conversation about the role of government and the role of business. Started with Milton Friedman, where he said the only responsibility of business is to make a profit. And if they are talking about social conscience or responsibility other than making a profit, they're socialists and should not be in business. That was the beginning of the ideological struggle against what we would call the New Deal, and also against the Great Society, where the common overall arching theme was that there was a responsibility of society and of business to help, help citizens, et cetera. And at that time, if we look at the spans of our life, that we've lived through a period where the U.S. had the greatest equality in its history to the time right now where we have the greatest inequality of our history. And that's because the other side has worked consciously over the years, not just to win elections, but to change the role of government, to change the ideological structure in the country, and to create and recruit people to fill all the roles of governing in society. And so I think filling in the infrastructure of the Trump administration is just the next step in their decided role to privatize almost all government services and ensure that the wealthiest have all the power and money. And so part of our job is to slow that process down by resisting it. But I think also part of our problem over the years, and certainly going forward, is what is the long-term plan? How are we building organizations that people are committed to for life, that is around the principles of making life better, and that is always doing outreach, always looking to include and not to exclude people, and always realizing that everybody's not going to agree on every single thing, but what are the main principles that unite you, and that we need to look at what some people would refer to as the class struggle in a fairly serious way, because it is real, and that I don't think we've built the kind of organizations or the kind of power that we need. And I think one of the problems, I think that you alluded to, is that rather than building ongoing organizations, too often we've been on single issue campaigns or also just looking at electoral campaigns as a solution. And honestly, the Democratic Party, as you know, is controlled by billionaires as much as by everyday people, and it's a struggle inside. But I think our job is to continue to resist, and to resist by building organizations and by figuring out how to unify people around all the time. And electoral part of it is a tactic. It's not the strategy, it's a tactic. So in a nutshell, that's where I think we're at. I mean, I think we need to organize, and train new organizers, and find people who are plugged into the culture and respect people's culture, and bring them together around things that can unite millions of people, which is anger at the unfairness of life for most of us in the country right now.
That's what worked for them. I mean, there was an anger, people just concerned about their general situation. And rather than look at what really determines all these things, they just kind of gave the finger to, in this case, to the Democrats, and went with someone who clearly is not going to bring about things that they want or hope for.
I know, but he, I mean, it's not surprising to me, because he has I guess we can't say it, but you say give the finger. He's upsetting the established order, and what the problem is in people's lives is the established order doesn't work. From the healthcare system,
right,
to the employment situation, to the education system, it doesn't work. And so people who look like and are it's the same. If you think back on our time in Doin, people from the South who came up north looking for a better life, they were treated completely unfairly. Well, what was the problem? Part of our job was to respect them and then help them figure out that the problem that they were having was the same as the problem that the Black people and Latino people were having. And by working together, we could solve it. But if we weren't in touch with them and connected to them in a real way, that we couldn't move people to our side on those issues.
We got about 3 minutes left of this segment of this week's Live from the Heartland show. And I wondered if you would like to maybe say a few words about a couple of the organizers you've known. You mentioned Marshall Gans. I threw in here in my notes Marilyn Katz. What do you got to say about these or anyone else in terms of inspiration for younger people getting involved and going out there and doing it?
Well, for the most part, good organizers aren't well known. You know that it's Marshall Gans is a Harvard professor now, and spends time doing that, and he's definitely made a contribution, as did Marilyn. Marilyn was a PR person, a political operative, and brought a lot of people together. But many of the most inspirational organizers I met are people that will never be famous, but did really incredible things. Just maybe one story. I have to do it real quick, since when I was organizing for the farm workers, that there was a crew, people who worked in crews. They put a United Farm Worker flag up on their, it was a lettuce truck, their lettuce truck. They were fired that day. from their jobs. And these are people who don't have a lot of money to spare. So we had a meeting to figure out what to do. The people in the union side thought, well, we can file a charge with the Agricultural Labor Relations Board, blah, blah, blah. But the farm workers, and this was a broad, there's young guys, women, whatever, decided, no, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to go back to work tomorrow, and we're going to get on the machine just like nothing happened. And we're going to dare them to throw us off. They did that. They got on the machine. They put up the farm worker flag. When it was time to start working, they started working. No one said a word about it. We won that election pretty big.
Nice, Bob. Thanks a lot for coming on Live from the Heartland. And as we close out, I'd just like to say that every week we bring you interesting guests like Pat Handlin and Bob Lawson today. And we can't do this for free. We're looking for some support. And if you would like to help us out, get a hold of us at our new email, livefromtheheartlandshow@gmail.com. We'd love to get a little bit of your money. We'd love to hear what you think about the show and any suggestions you have for the future. Okay, so we want to encourage you all to do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do. I want to thank our engineer, Hal James, our producers, Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman. And we will be back next week. We're going to have a sports report from cousin Adam James, who always is pretty interesting. And who knows who else we'll have. We'll be back, though, so do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Bob does, the rest of us do. All power to the people. Over and out. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21 or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing